told me I wasn't allowed to touch the piano until I apologized. It was sitting right there in the living room of my own house, the one I'd owned since 1987, and my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said it like she was correcting a child. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry. I went back to my bedroom, called my realtor, and had the house listed by 4 o'clock that afternoon. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Beatrice, and I'm 71 years old, and I've lived alone for the past 6 years, ever since my husband passed, in a house on Clover Street in Eugene, Oregon, that I know the way I know my own hands. Every light switch, every drafty corner in February, every floorboard that creaks differently depending on whether it's raining. That house was mine before my son was born. I bought it with money I saved working 2 jobs the year after college. My husband and I refinished the kitchen ourselves on our first anniversary, kneeling on cold linoleum at midnight, laughing at nothing. I never forgot that. When my husband died, the house got quieter in ways I couldn't have predicted. Not just the absence of him, his coffee smell, his television habits, his voice calling from the other room, but the way silence accumulates differently when you're the only one left to hear it. I managed. I taught piano lessons 3 afternoons a week at the community center. I started a small herb garden in the backyard. I called my granddaughter Lily every Sunday without fail. My son Nathan suggested moving in about 2 years ago. He made it sound like it was for me. He said the house was too big for one person, that he and his wife Vanessa could help with the upkeep, that it would be good for all of us to be under the same roof. I was cautious. I told him I appreciated the thought, but I wanted to be clear. The house was mine, my name alone on the deed, and that wasn't changing. Nathan nodded. He said, "Of course, Mom." He said he would never presume. I should have written that down. They moved in on the Saturday in March. Lily was there too. She was 16 then, Nathan's daughter from his first marriage, and she had always been the kind of kid who helped without being asked. She carried boxes, set up the internet router, ate 3 slices of the welcome pizza, and still offered to do dishes. I loved her instantly and had loved her since she was small. She was the reason I agreed to any of this. I thought, if nothing else, I'll get to see her more. For the first few months, things were manageable. Vanessa was efficient and organized and kept the kitchen cleaner than I ever had. She color-coded the spice rack. She bought a second set of towels so we each had our own shelf. She smiled whenever she passed me in the hallway, and it was always the right length of smile. Not too warm, not too cold. The kind of smile a hotel concierge gives you. Professional. Practiced. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself she was adjusting. The piano was in the front room, where it had been for 30 years. An old upright, nothing fancy, bought secondhand in 1992 when I first started teaching. It wasn't beautiful. The finish had dulled to a soft brown, and middle C had a slight buzz that I'd learned to work around. But I loved it the way you love something that has been useful and present and undemanding for 3 decades. I played it every morning, sometimes just scales, sometimes hymns, sometimes pieces I half remembered from when Lily was small. About 4 months after they moved in, Vanessa mentioned that the piano was disruptive. She didn't say it to me directly. She said it to Nathan in the kitchen while I was in the next room. Her voice is low but not low enough. She said it interfered with her work-from-home calls. She said the sound carried in a way she hadn't anticipated. She said maybe we could look into moving it to the garage. I heard all of it. I didn't say a word. The next morning, I played for an hour and a half. Not loudly, not defiantly, just as I always had. A week later, Vanessa spoke to me directly. She came into the front room while I was playing and stood in the doorway until I stopped. She said, and I remember this precisely because I turned it over in my mind for days afterward. She said, "Bea, I think we need to establish some ground rules about shared spaces." I said, "This isn't a shared space. This is my living room." She smiled, that hotel smile, and said she understood, but that Nathan and she needed to think of the whole house as their home now too, and she was just asking for some consideration. She said the piano could stay in the living room, but she'd appreciate it if I didn't play before 9 or after 8, and not during the lunch hour, and not on Fridays when she had back-to-back calls. I counted in my head. That was roughly 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, assuming no other restrictions appeared. I said I'd think about it. That night, Lily knocked on my bedroom door. She sat on the edge of the bed the way she had since she was small and said, without preamble, "She's not going to stop, Grandma Bay." I asked her what she meant. She said, "It's what she does. She starts with a little, and then it becomes more. I looked at her carefully. She wasn't being dramatic. She was being accurate. I said, "How long has she been like this?" Lily picked at the hem of her sleeve. "Since before I can remember." I thought about that for a long time after she went back to her room. The real break came on a Tuesday in October. Lily had a school concert. She played flute, had played since 4th grade, and this was a big one. The fall showcase at the high school. The kind where parents sat in folding chairs in the gym and pretended the acoustics were fine. I had promised her months ago that I'd come. I had marked it on the calendar on the refrigerator in red marker. Nathan texted me that afternoon. He said Vanessa was having people from her firm over for dinner at 6, that the house would be busy, that it might be easier if I skipped the concert and stayed home, so I could, as he put it, help manage the flow. I read that text 3 times. Help manage the flow. I was the homeowner. I was being asked to stay home and answer the door for my daughter-in-law's colleagues so she could concentrate on her hosting. I did not stay home. I drove myself to the school, sat in the 3rd row, and watched my granddaughter play a flute solo that made the woman beside me tear up. Lily saw me from the stage, and her whole face changed. That particular brightness children have when the person they hoped would come actually came. I had not seen that look directed at me in a long time. I kept it with me like something I'd folded and put in my pocket. When I got home at 9, the dinner party was still going. Vanessa was in the kitchen in a dress I'd never seen, her hair done, laughing at something a man in a blazer had said. Nathan was at the living room bar cart pouring drinks. No one acknowledged me when I came through the door. I went to my room, set my purse on the dresser, and stared at the ceiling for a while. The next morning, I sat down to play, and Vanessa came in again. This time she didn't stand in the doorway. She walked into the room and closed the piano lid while I was mid-phrase. She said very calmly, "I asked you to be respectful of this space, and last night you humiliated me in front of my colleagues by not being here to help." I sat very still. She said, "Until you're ready to apologize for that, I'd appreciate it if you didn't use the piano. It's a communal instrument now, and we should all have to earn the privilege of using it. A communal instrument, in my house, that I had owned for 35 years. I looked at her standing there with her arms crossed, so certain of herself, so practiced in the art of making unreasonable things sound reasonable. And I thought of Lily saying she starts with a little and then it becomes more. And I thought of Nathan, who was probably in the next room pretending not to hear. I stood up from the bench. "All right," I said. "Thank you for letting me know." I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and called my realtor. Her name was Frances, and I had worked with her when I bought the house back in '87, and she had helped me refinish the title paperwork after my husband passed. She answered on the second ring. I told her I needed to sell the house, and I needed to move quickly. She was quiet for exactly 1 second, and then she said, "How soon can I come by?" She was there by 2. Frances walked through every room with the steady efficiency of someone who has seen 1,000 houses and can tell immediately which ones carry something real. She paused in the front room at the piano, the way people pause in front of certain paintings. She ran one finger along the top of it. "Does this stay?" she asked. "No," I said. "That goes with me." She nodded like that told her everything she needed to know. She took her notes, pulled comps on her tablet, and said the market in Eugene was still reasonably active for well-maintained older properties. She said with the updates Nathan and I had done to the roof last year, which I'd paid for in full every penny, $22,000, and the kitchen renovation from 2019, which I had also paid for, another $16,000. She thought we could list at a strong price and expect genuine interest within a week or 2. I told her I wanted a quiet listing first, no open houses, no strangers wandering through on a Sunday. She asked if my son knew. I told her he would. She wrote her number on a card and left it on the kitchen table. Vanessa was upstairs. Nathan was at the office. I sat at the table with the card and a cup of tea and thought about the fact that I had signed the original mortgage on this house at the age of 26, alone, with shaking hands, and that I had never once asked anyone's permission to live here. I didn't tell Nathan right away. I gave myself 3 days, not to second guess, but to be certain. There's a difference. I didn't want to act out of anger. I wanted to act out of clarity. And by the 3rd morning, sipping coffee at the kitchen table while the house was still quiet and the backyard still looked like mine, I was certain. I called the real estate attorney. Her office was in Springfield, a short drive, and she confirmed what I already knew. The deed was solely in my name, had been since 1987, and no cohabitation arrangement, however informal, gave Nathan or Vanessa any legal claim to the property or any right to block a sale. She went through the documents I brought with the careful thoroughness of someone who understands that old women with clear ownership and clear documentation are not to be underestimated. I thanked her, wrote the check for the consultation, and drove myself to lunch. Francis called the following Thursday. She'd had a couple reach out, a retired firefighter and his wife, a pediatric nurse, both originally from Oregon, who had been looking for something with history and character in the Eugene area. They had seen the outside while driving past, had asked Francis about it immediately. They toured on Friday morning. I was home during the tour. I showed them the kitchen, the garden, the front room with the piano still in it. The wife, whose name I never asked because somehow it didn't feel like my business, stopped at the fireplace and looked at the tiles her my husband had laid by hand in 1995. She said, "Someone put a lot of love into this." I said yes. She looked at me, not with pity, with recognition, and said, "We'll take care of it." I believed her. They offered full asking price. No contingencies. Conventional loan pre-approved. Frances called me that afternoon, and I could hear the controlled excitement in her voice. I sat at the kitchen table with the offer letter for a long time. The afternoon light came through the window the way it always had, slanted and golden, hitting the corner of the table at that particular angle that made the wood look honey-colored. I thought about the 37 years I had spent in this house. I thought about my husband and his crossword puzzles and his terrible jokes about local weather. I thought about Nathan at 6 years old building a blanket fort in the living room and leaving it up for 9 days because I hadn't had the heart to take it down. I thought about Lily at 3, banging cheerfully on the piano keys while I pretended she was making music. Then I thought about the piano lid being closed on me, mid-phrase. I signed the offer letter. The documents went to the attorney, then to escrow, and I said nothing to Nathan for 4 more days. I was not trying to be cruel. I was trying to be finished. He found out on a Wednesday. I don't know how. Maybe he saw the escrow notice forwarded to my email, which he had apparently been checking without my knowledge, which is its own conversation. He came home that evening while I was making dinner and stood in the kitchen doorway looking like a man who had lost something he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He said, "Mom, you can't sell the house." I said, "It's already sold." He said, "You didn't even talk to me about this." I set down the wooden spoon and looked at him. He was 51 years old, and he looked, in that moment, very young. Not young in a sympathetic way, young in the way of someone who has never fully reckoned with consequences. I said, "Nathan, in the 6 months you've lived here, I have paid every utility bill, every property tax installment, and the $3,400 HVAC repair in August. I have not once asked you to contribute to the mortgage, because there is no mortgage. I paid this house off in 2009. I have been asked to apologize for going to my granddaughter's concert. I have been told I may not use my own piano without earning the privilege, and you want to tell me I can't sell my house?" He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Vanessa was just trying to make it work." I nodded. "I know," I said. "So was I." I stopped. He left the room. I finished making dinner. I ate alone, and it was fine. Vanessa came to me 2 days later. She was composed, as always, but something in the composure was thinner than usual. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table without being invited and said she wanted to understand what she had done that was so unforgivable. She used that word, unforgivable. I said, "Nothing you did was unforgivable. You just did enough of it." She looked at me with something I couldn't quite name. Not hurt, not anger. Something more like confusion. I think she had expected that moment to go differently. I think she had expected me to either crumble or escalate, and I did neither. I just looked back at her calmly and waited. She said, "We have nowhere to go." I said, "You have 8 weeks before closing. That's enough time." She left the table. Nathan didn't speak to me for 6 days. I was not crushed by this. Lily came by on a Saturday with a box of my favorite apricot pastries from the bakery on Willamette. She set them on the table and sat down and said, "I'm not mad at you." I told her I wasn't asking for that. She said, "I know. I just wanted to say it." We ate the pastries and talked about her flute lessons and a boy in her class who had started paying attention to her in ways that were making her both happy and suspicious. I told her the suspicious part was smart. She laughed. She had her grandfather's laugh, wide and unguarded, and every time I heard it, it was a gift. She asked, toward the end of the visit, where I was going to go. I told her I'd found a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex about 10 minutes away on the south side of town. It had a covered balcony, an elevator, and, crucially, a ground floor unit available next to the community room, which meant I could move the piano there and, with management's permission, offer lessons to residents who wanted them. Lily looked at me steadily. "You already planned it," she said. "I planned most of it before I even called Francis," I said. She was quiet. Then she said, "What about the trust?" She had heard, somehow, about the financial arrangement I'd made with my attorney. I hadn't told her directly. I hadn't told anyone directly. I reached across the table. "When you're 25, I said, there will be a sum of money held in trust for you. Not from the sale. I've set other things aside for that. From what your grandfather and I saved over 40 years of small decisions and long winters. I want you to use it when you're ready to start something. Not when someone allows you to start something. When you're ready." She didn't cry, but her eyes got bright in the way they do before someone makes a decision not to cry. She said, "Okay, Grandma Bay." The movers came on a Tuesday, 2 brothers who worked with efficient cheerfulness and called me ma'am, which I asked them politely to stop, and then called me Beatrice, which was perfect. They wrapped the piano with more care than I expected, moving it down the front steps with a kind of reverence that made me feel understood in some quiet way I couldn't explain. I stood in the emptied front room after they'd taken the last piece of furniture. The floors looked bigger without everything on them. The walls had small pale rectangles where pictures had hung. The tile around the fireplace was the same, hand-laid, imperfect, real. I traced one of the edges with my finger and said, out loud, to no one, "We did good here. I meant my husband. I meant myself. I meant the 37 years of ordinary days that had stacked themselves into something worth remembering." Nathan had been staying at a hotel for 2 weeks by then, which I learned from Lily. He and Vanessa had found a rental in a neighboring town. I hadn't heard from him directly since the conversation in the kitchen. I wasn't waiting. The night before I moved into the apartment, I sat on the floor of the empty bedroom with a cup of chamomile and wrote him a letter. I didn't plan to send it. I just needed to put the words somewhere outside of my own chest. "Nathan, you asked me what you did that was so unforgivable. I want you to know the answer isn't what you think. It wasn't the night of the concert, or the piano, or the months of bills you let me carry without asking. It was the silence. Not once in 6 months did you come to me privately and say, 'I see what's happening here, and I'm sorry.' Not once did you walk into that room and put your hand on my shoulder. You stood in doorways while other people made decisions about my life, and you looked at the floor and you said nothing. I know that felt like staying out of it. I want you to know it felt, to me, like choosing. You chose, every single time. And I have spent enough years waiting for people to choose differently. I love you. I'm not angry. I'm just done waiting. Mom." I folded it, held it for a moment, and then put it in a small box labeled "Things I've Already Let Go." The apartment is small and full of afternoon light. The piano takes up most of the living room, which is exactly how I want it. I started teaching again. 3 residents on Monday mornings, 2 on Thursday afternoons, and a teenage girl from 2 floors up who plays with the intensity of someone who has been waiting a long time to be taken seriously. I take her very seriously. Lily comes on the 2nd Sunday of every month. She brings something from the bakery, and we sit on the balcony and talk without any particular agenda. Last time she stayed 4 hours. She showed me pictures from her school trip and asked me to play something before she left. I played the piece her grandfather had loved, something quiet, old, a little melancholy in the way that beautiful things sometimes are. She sat on the couch with her knees pulled up and listened to the whole thing without looking at her phone once. When I finished, she said, "I'm going to come back next month too." I said, "I know you are." Nathan sent a text about 3 weeks after closing. It said, "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. I don't think I handled any of it right. I'd like to talk when you're ready." I set the phone down and looked out the window for a while at the street below, at the ordinary movement of people going about their day. I picked the phone back up and typed, "I'll let you know when I'm ready." I haven't sent him away. I haven't invited him back. I'm just not in a hurry in the way I used to be, before I understood that waiting is a choice, not a condition. Some mornings I sit at the piano before anyone else in the building is awake, and I play whatever I feel like playing, at whatever hour I feel like playing, at whatever hour I feel like playing it, for as long as I want. No one closes the lid. No one comes to the doorway to remind me of the schedule. The building is quiet and the keys are familiar and the light comes through the window at that angle I've started to expect. I play until I'm done. Then I make my coffee. Then I begin. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that house. Not the piano, not the concert, not even the closing documents. What happened was something quieter and slower. The kind of thing you don't name until you're standing in an empty room, looking at pale rectangles on the wall where your pictures used to hang. What happened was I kept choosing peace over truth. And for a long time I told myself those were the same thing. They aren't. Every time Nathan stood in a doorway and said nothing, there was a cause. Every time I swallowed something that deserved to be spoken, there was an effect, not punishment. I don't believe life works like a ledger where someone eventually settles the debt, but I do believe that what we allow to continue, continues. I allowed the slow replacement of myself, one small thing at a time, because I love my son, and I wanted to believe that love was enough reason to shrink. It wasn't. Love is not a reason to disappear. It took me 71 years to really understand that. The intelligence I needed wasn't cleverness. It wasn't knowing property law or how to read an escrow notice. It was the harder kind, the kind that asks you to see a situation clearly, even when seeing it clearly means you have to do something about it. Lily had that intelligence at 16. She sat on my bed and told me, without drama, that Vanessa starts with a little and then it becomes more. She was right. Children often are, because they haven't yet learned to dress inconvenient truths up as something more palatable. I had learned that. I unlearned it. What I did when I called Francis wasn't brave in the way people mean when they say brave. I wasn't fearless. I was tired of being afraid of the wrong things. I had spent years being afraid of conflict, of disapproval, of taking up too much space in a house I owned outright. The moment I stopped being afraid of those things, the decision wasn't hard at all. It was just true. Vanessa once called the piano a communal instrument. I've turned that phrase over many times since. What she meant was, your things are ours when we want them, and yours alone when they're inconvenient. That's not community. That's absorption. And there's a difference between being part of something and being absorbed by it, between belonging and disappearing into someone else's version of what you should be. Nathan is going to have to sit with what he allowed. Not what Vanessa did, what he allowed. That's not a punishment. That's just how cause and effect actually works between people who love each other. The silence he chose had weight, and he's carrying it now. I hope he puts it down eventually, not for my sake, but for his own. Guilt is a terrible place to live long term. And Lily already knows what I want her to know. That the money and that trust isn't the point. The point is the instruction that came with it. You don't have to earn permission to be fully yourself. Not from a partner, not from a parent, not from anyone who benefits from you making yourself smaller. You just have to decide that you're done waiting for the invitation and start walking through the door anyway. I play the piano every morning now. No schedule, no conditions, no one counting the hours. That's not a small thing. That's everything.